Hello, and thank you for joining us. My name is Julie Rose, and I would like to welcome you to today's webinar, The Power of Employee Recognition. Before we begin, I'd like to go over a few pieces of information about the webinar. To avoid interruptions to the presentation, all attendees are in listen-only mode. You can still ask questions using the Q&A box in the webinar dashboard, and we will make every effort to address your questions at the end of the presentation as time allows. Today's presentation is available on the CPS HR Consulting website. We'll also forward a link to all of today's attendees once the recording is available for viewing. Our presenters today are Bob Lavinia, Director for the Institute for Public Sector Employee Engagement with CPS HR Consulting, Felicia Borges, who is the Manager of Planning and Organizational Development and Statewide Employee Engagement Program at CalHR, and Jonathan Calabretta, who is the Merit Award Program Manager with CalHR. As I mentioned, Bob Lavinia is the Director of the Institute for Public Sector Employee Engagement. The Institute is dedicated to helping public sector organizations measure and improve employee engagement. Bob literally wrote the book on employee engagement. He authored the best-selling book, Engaging Government Employees. Over the course of his career, he has also held positions as Assistant Vice Chancellor and Director of HR for the University of Wisconsin, Vice President of Research for the Partnership for Public Service, and Administrator of the Wisconsin Civil Service System. And now, without further ado, I will turn the presentation over to Bob.
Thanks, Julie. And I also want to welcome everyone to our session. Depending upon where you are, it's either good morning or good afternoon. We've had a terrific turnout for this webinar, so I want to thank everyone for participating. And I really think the turnout today reflects the national interest in employee engagement and the role of employee recognition in employee engagement and also in attracting and retaining talent. And that will be the focus of our conversation today. I like to start out by saying I believe the biggest challenge facing public sector organizations, and at all levels, really federal, state, and local, is attracting, developing, engaging, and retaining talent. Because in government, CPS itself is a government agency, our ability to succeed depends almost entirely on the level of talent. The right people with the right skills in the right places at the right times. We can have the best policies, the best ideas, even the best technology, but if we don't have talented people to execute on those policies and ideas and manage that technology, we can't succeed. And that's why we're so excited about employee engagement and the role of recognition in creating high engaged workforces. So we have a lot of material today. We're going to get right to it. What we're going to do is address really three different areas. First of all, I will provide some background and context on employee engagement in general. What is it? Definition. And why does it matter? What's the business case for why we as organizations should be focusing on employee engagement? Then I'll share with you some results from a national survey conducted by our institute that assess the level of employee engagement, as well as what the key drivers of engagement are. And that's where I'll connect the dots between engagement and employee recognition, talk a little bit about the power of employee recognition and the role that it plays in generating a high level of employee engagement. Then we'll transition to Felicia, who'll talk about the California state government experience in measuring and improving engagement. And then Jonathan will talk about what they're doing in California state government in celebrating Public Service Recognition Week as an example, I think, for all of us across the country. So a little bit more about CPS Consulting. Julie gave you a little bit of a background. We are a self-supporting government agency. We focus on integrated HR solutions for the public sector as a way to improve organizational performance and deliver a high level of service to the residents and citizens that government serves. We have about 1,200 public sector clients, the majority of which are state and local government organizations. About 2 years ago, we created the Institute for Public Sector Employee Engagement to allow us at CPS HR to focus more intensively on helping public sector organizations measure and improve employee engagement. And we also conduct research, including our national survey to assess the level of and drivers of employee engagement. Julie mentioned my book, and I show you this image of the cover, not as a commercial, although it is available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, but to explain why I wrote the book. I wrote it because I believe in the power of employee engagement, but also in my own research on engagement, it became clear to me early on that most of what had been said and written about employee engagement focused on the private sector and not on what I consider to be the unique challenges of managing in the public sector. So I devoted, I think it's the longest chapter in the book, on identifying those differences and their implications for improving employee engagement. Of course, one of the most important and significant differences that we'll talk about today is really the limited ability of government to recognize employees financially. So we have to come up with different ways to measure the contributions, not only measure, but recognize and reward the contributions of public servants. A little bit more context. This is, let me back up a little too fast. This is the slide that shows, as you can see, the age distribution of the sectors of the American economy, federal, state, local, and private. And I think you can immediately see on the right side of this chart, we in government have a higher percentage of employees who are older, specifically over the age of 50, than the private sector. On the other end of the chart, we have a lower percentage of employees who are under the age of 30. So this information really has many important implications for how we manage in government for areas like succession planning, knowledge transfer, recruiting and hiring, because these 50-somethings are beginning to retire in large numbers. This retirement tsunami that we've been hearing about for like 10 or 15 years is beginning to occur. So we're going to need to develop the next generation of leaders. We're going to need to do succession planning, knowledge transfer, and make sure that we are able to attract and hire talented young people. And this chart also has implications for employee engagement and employee recognition, because if we want to not only attract talented people to government, but engage them and retain them and put them in a position to be successful, we need to create the conditions so they can feel like they are making a difference, feel good about what they're doing, be proud of what they're doing, and be recognized. And that's a key to employee retention. So what's engagement? This is how we define engagement. It's consistent with how engagement is defined in the literature. It's really about a personal connection between the individual employee and the organization, the mission of the organization, colleagues, and even the leaders of the organization. Engaged employees feel good about what they do. They're proud of what they do. They feel that the organization values them. And in return, they're willing to deliver what is known as discretionary effort, which really just means they're willing to do whatever it takes to help the organization succeed. And it goes beyond job satisfaction. Employees can be satisfied because their pay is fair, benefits are good, benefits still are good in the public sector, and they have reasonable workloads. And we want our people to feel good about those things, but we also want them to sort of take the next step up and become engaged. And employee recognition is an important factor in generating a high level of engagement. And when I think of engagement, I like to think of it as really maybe having two components. There's an intellectual component, that is, objectively speaking, I believe this is the best place for me to use my talents, my knowledge, skills, abilities, and competencies, but also an emotional connection. I feel good about this place. I feel good about what I'm doing. I believe in the organization, and I feel like I'm making a difference. So it's about the head, but it's also about the heart. And these are some of the ways that engaged employees demonstrate that they are engaged. And I'm not going to read these because you can read them, but I want to mention two. Engaged employees are more likely to stay with the organization, even if they have opportunities to make more money elsewhere. And there's research that supports that. Of course, there's probably a limit on how much financial gain they're willing to sacrifice, but the research shows that engaged employees are much more likely to stay, even if they have other opportunities. They'll also recommend the organization as a good place to work. And we want our folks out in their communities and their networks encouraging others to consider public service as a career, and also saying good things about where they work in order to combat what is often intense criticism, relentless criticism of government and the people who are government. So we want our people to be recommending our organizations as good places to work and generally saying good things about where they work. So I'm going to show you some of the data, really only the tip of the tip of the tip of the iceberg, that connects the dots between employee engagement and performance, because that's really why we want to focus on engagement, not for its own sake, not as just another HR program, but because driving high levels of engagement will drive high levels of organizational performance. But before I show you the numbers, I want to show you a picture. And some of you have seen me present this picture. This is an actual photo of a work product, and I use that term advisedly, that was probably done by someone who we might refer to as actively disengaged. In other words, not just disengaged, but someone who comes to work every day and tries to undo all the good work that you and your colleagues are trying to do. And this is an actual photo. I'm sure it wasn't taken in your organization or your jurisdiction. But let's see some real data. This is from another consulting organization, Towers Watson, based on a random sample of state and local government employees. They were asked to respond to a series of statements, including, I can impact quality, cost, and customer service. And you see that the highly engaged are up to 3 times more likely, at least in the survey, to agree with the statement so they can impact quality, cost, and customer service. Again, these are state and local government employees. And don't we want our people to believe and feel good about their ability to impact outcomes like quality, cost, and customer service? This is from our own research, our national survey. One of the questions, statements that we asked our random sample of employees in a variety of occupations in both the private and public sectors is to respond to the statement, my organization is successful at accomplishing its mission. And here you see again, the engaged employees, almost 3 times more likely to agree with this statement, up to 3 times more likely. Look at local government, 76% compared to 24%, and the same, almost the same relationship across all sectors of the economy. So again, highly engaged employees much more likely to believe and feel that their organization is successful. Excuse me. Lots more research, and we don't have time to go through it today, but connecting the dots, particularly and including in government, the public sector, linking high levels of engagement to all of what you see here. In the federal government, research showing that high engagement federal agencies 3 times more likely to be successful in achieving strategic goals. Retention. Some surveys have shown that the single biggest difference between high engagement and low engagement organizations is in retention, much lower turnover in high engagement organizations. So, you know, this stuff makes sense. It's common sense, but there is empirical research supporting the argument, the conclusion, the fact that high engagement organizations have better outcomes than low engagement organizations. And we sum all of this research up in what we describe as this engagement value chain. And that is, improving engagement drives performance, that drives higher citizen satisfaction, that drives more trust in government. And if public servants believe that there's a high level of trust in government, they are also more likely to feel engaged. So we refer to this as a virtuous cycle. So part of our research was also to assess the overall levels of engagement across the US economy. Whoop. A little too quick with my trigger finger here. And I don't know, this is not showing up, but let me summarize it by saying that what we found is a higher level of engagement in the private versus the public sector. Really pretty consistent, around 30% fully engaged at all levels of government, and about 44% level of fully engaged in the private sector. So, and perhaps not surprisingly, lower level of engagement in government than there is in the private sector. But we also dug down a little deeper to try to identify what the top drivers of engagement are. And what you see here are the top 3 cultural factors that we identified in our national survey that drive engagement. And here's where we directly connect the dots between recognition and employee engagement. The number one cultural driver across all sectors is appreciation and recognition. Employees in all sectors want to be appreciated, want to be recognized. So those are the cultural factors. And here are the results from one of the questions on our survey. I feel valued for the work that I do. You see the percent positive across all sectors. You see a significant difference between the private sector and government overall. 70% of private sector employees reported they feel valued for the work that they do, compared to 64% in government overall, 66 federal, 64 local, 62 state. Well, you might look at these numbers and say, well, you know, they're not really too bad. 64% government overall agree with this statement. But I look at it and say that more than 1 out of 3 employees across government overall do not feel valued for the work that they do. So really, an opportunity here, if we can focus on appreciation and recognition, and not just 1 week a year, Public Service Recognition Week, but in our day-to-day interactions with the people we work with, if we can improve the level of appreciation and recognition, make more people feel valued, we can move the needle of employee engagement and therefore improve organizational performance. And here is, I'm not going to go through these again, but we often hear, particularly in government, you know, we don't have the money, there isn't the political will to recognize employees financially. We understand that, but there are also ways, and we'll talk about them a little bit more, I think Jonathan will focus on them, to recognize employees, as you see here, without spending a dime. This is from the University of Wisconsin Hospital and Clinics Supervisors Toolkit, opportunities to recognize employees without spending a dime. And these are just some examples of that. So how do we know if our employees are engaged? And just as important, what drives their engagement? I showed you some results from our national survey, but we really need to understand in our own organizations the level of engagement and what is driving their organization, their engagement. And the answer to that is to survey. And that's our approach, and that's what the literature also supports. So asking our employees how they feel about the organization, how they feel about their supervisor, their leaders, their colleagues, their resources, the culture, and whether or not they believe that they are valued as employees, because engaged employees are proud of what they do and they feel valued. And these are some of the reasons why we survey, including sending a message to all of our employees, every single employee, that we care about what you have to say about our organization. Another way of demonstrating to our employees that we value them. And organizations that focus on employee engagement must measure it, must understand what the level of engagement is, must understand what drives the level of engagement. And this is our model, and I show you this because I want to emphasize that only one step is about surveying employees. You know, we can survey our employees, but unless we make a commitment to act and then follow through on that commitment, we are probably going to be worse off than we had not surveyed. So surveying employees is only one phase in what we describe as a 5-stage process. So I am going to now segue to Felicia and Jonathan, starting with Felicia. I'm going to introduce them. Felicia Borges is the Planning and Organizational Development Manager at California Department of Human Resources, CalHR. She also helped create, and she now manages, the California state government's first ever statewide employee engagement program, has nearly 10 years of health workforce development experience, including program planning, development, and management of numerous workforce-related federal, state, and privately funded grant programs. So Felicia is going to talk about the statewide employee engagement program, and then she will pass the reins on to Jonathan Calabretta, who will talk about employee recognition. Jonathan spent over 10 years in college student engagement on campuses across the country. His expertise is now utilized by CalHR to develop and promulgate sustainable, successful employee engagement programs for all California state departments. Through the maximization of the Merit Award program and existing State Department best practices, Jonathan leads the charge to create new tools and resources to recognize state employees. So take it away, Felicia.
Thank you, Bob, and thank you everyone for being here today. First, I'm going to just quickly overview both the statewide employee engagement survey that was done back in 2015, and then I'll transition to what we're currently doing around statewide employee engagement. So if you could go to the next slide. And my apologies, the next slide, please. Great. So first, some of you may be aware that in 2015, the Government Operations Agency here in California asked 5,000 randomly selected state employees at all levels about their job satisfaction and level of work engagement. Next slide, please. Some notable findings included a majority of employees believing that what they do is important to the lives of Californians, but employees did not feel that they were getting recognition for doing good work. Next slide, please. And so in response to that, CalHR led the development of an employee recognition toolkit, which you're going to hear a little bit more from Jonathan about recognition. And the toolkit highlighted the existing merit award program's ability to support engagement, collaborated with GovOps in terms of providing a webinar around those efforts, and committing to a foundation of a work group to build more resources going forward. And then in addition, departments were also encouraged to support flexible work arrangements for its employees when they meet the needs of both the department and the employee. And then fast forwarding to today, next slide, also creating what we refer to now as the statewide employee engagement program. In 2015, or since 2015, this program has evolved and expanded into an annual service. It's now available to all of our state departments here in California. And the statewide employee engagement program, we consider it fast, simple, affordable, and repeatable. Basically, we've created a program that allows us to focus on all of the infrastructure and the operationalizing of creating and administering the survey so that our departments can focus on acting on the results of the survey. Next slide, please. And so in terms of our program overall, it is administered here at CalHR. To date, we've had 5 departments participate in this inaugural year, with more already scheduled for early 2018-19. And then coming soon at the tail end of the 2017-18 fiscal year, we will be pulling all of that data together for an annual statewide report that will include statewide trend analysis and recommendations for statewide solutions to possibly improve engagement statewide. Next slide, please. So just a little bit of detail in terms of some of the components of the program. Regarding our survey, it was a 10-question survey back in 2015. It's now been expanded to include 52 questions as well as 10 demographic questions. And because of those 10 demographic questions and just the way that the state is set up, we did go through the process of having the survey itself reviewed through our CalHR Legal as well as Labor Relations and the Office of Civil Rights. And our unions were informed prior to making the survey available to any of our state departments. And then also, I'm proud to share that we administer this survey through our third-party vendor, which just happens to be CPS HR's Institute for Public Sector Employee Engagement. And it's a great value to employees because it ensures anonymity. As a department, employees can be assured that the raw data will never be seen by anyone at their department, and we at CalHR never see the raw data. We only see it in the aggregate, so they really value that. It's a big selling feature for our survey service. Next slide, please. A little bit about the data and the reporting. Engagement is measured for overall department as well as what we call breakouts. That might be divisions or geographic locations throughout your organization. A minimum of 20 is included in what we call our standard package, but we do allow for additional additional breakouts. In terms of data itself, it's benchmarked with public and private sector data, very similar to what Bob showed at the top of the presentation. There's statistical analysis of workplace factors and culture that's done behind the scenes with the data once the survey is closed. We include highest and lowest scoring questions for each of the, not only the overall, but also all of the breakouts. And the report itself is presented to department execs. So we come in and we present the findings of the survey to the execs, and then also begin to help them in terms of facilitating, okay, what are we going to do about acting on those results? And so next slide, please. And so with that, we're providing action planning guidance as well as a resource library of information. So for example, if the #1 issue that the organization needs to work on is managing change in your organization, there are resources that are available on what you can do about that. And then coming soon, this is a program that's still developing. We are in the process of getting access for departments to be able to go into the online system and use their data so that they can drill down further, as well as creating opportunities to learn from and collaborate with other state departments to improve their engagement. Next slide, please. And so recognizing that this is a national audience today, if you have any questions about what we're doing here in California, or if you're in California and want more information about how you can be involved, please feel free to reach out to me. I've also provided the website at the bottom of this slide. You're welcome to check that out. My contact information is on that webpage as well. So with that, go ahead and hit the next slide, Bob. I want to introduce Jonathan Calabretta, who is CalHR's Merit Award Program Manager, and he's going to be talking to you today about California's Public Service Recognition Week efforts for 2018. Thank you all for being here.
Thanks, Felicia. Hi, everyone. So we'll discuss the Public Service Recognition Week as a 1 week of intensive recognition, but I want you to utilize the activities as a resource of things to do year-round. And we'll also talk about some other recognition opportunities at the tail end of the presentation in response to some questions we've already received. So next slide, please. So we'll talk about the local and departmental suggested activities. So we'll go through those day by day. We'll also share the statewide appreciation events that we've developed for this year, and then the resources that are available both on CalHR's website as well as at the federal level. Next slide, please. So Public Service Recognition Week was established by the Public Employees Roundtable in 1985 to honor those who serve in the public sector. California really rejuvenated interest in this 2 years ago, and then last year started to try to create a formal program that we've since built on. Next slide. So in response to the 2015 engagement survey, CalHR created a multi-department retention recognition work group in June of 2016 that spent a year creating resources that departments could utilize at low to no cost, both to establish programs and to grow existing recognition programs. Members included state hospitals, our DMV, our high-speed rail, as well as the State Compensation Insurance Fund. And the efforts that we led last year resulted in 62,000 impressions with state employees. So hopefully we grow on that number this year, and I'll talk about how we'll track that later. Next slide, please. So the idea of acknowledging all employees allows for us to celebrate not just our high performers, but our people who show up every day and do a good job performers. And one of the easy ways for us to do that in state service is to recognize years of service. This serves to honor those that have committed their lives to this industry and this job, but also allows for millennials to have a moment of praise for achieving those early years of state service when maybe their peers are getting similar recognition at their private sector jobs. So we offer a template, a whiteboard template if you want, that has the logo of Public Service Recognition Week, and we encourage you to use your own logos on that to either highlight years of service or maybe you're focusing on core values as a department-wide initiative, and so you can use core values as well as a photo booth opportunity. Next slide. So CalSTRS, our state teachers retirement system, shared some images on their Twitter. They have a public-facing communications page celebrating, again, years of service and their support of all employees during Public Service Recognition Week. Next slide. We find that motivating supervisors and managers to engage employees in employee recognition is critical. And that message really has to come from above. So allowing for a department director or an executive level to host a meet and greet, a casual opportunity for employees to meet their department directors is one of the ways that we encourage departments to motivate from the top down that employee recognition should be a daily operation. This is a low budget event. We ask executives maybe to spring for some coffee or some donuts if that is an appropriate scale for the department. If not, then just the opportunity to talk to the executives could be enough to bring in your employees. And this is also a great photograph opportunity for your communications department to show that your department director is engaged and willing to talk to his employees or her employees. Next slide. Spirit Day. So this is Department Spirit Day or State Spirit Day, depending on what state you're in. You know, people work for the state because they're proud of the state they live in. So for our Caltrans department, for instance, those are the people that maintain all of the transportation in the state. They had a Wear Orange Day on the Wednesday of last year's Public Service Recognition Week, which highlighted the fact that our employees for Caltrans out in the field wear orange vests to identify that they're on the road, but also connected them to their headquarters and regional offices in a way that isn't necessarily typical. So their office peers showed support and solidarity, and then their communications department had a swath of opportunities to take pictures of people in orange and share that across the state. Next slide. Our franchise tax board did a Wear Blue Day. And so this is one of the ways they celebrated their employees in a public-facing manner by taking a picture of them in their blue and then allowing for the public to see that franchise tax board executives and management support all of their teams, including the volunteer income tax assistant team. Next slide. Thankful Thursday. So we encourage departments to print quarter sheet thank you cards. So putting a Public Service Recognition Week logo on a piece of paper in each of the four corners, cutting that up into four, and then printing these and encouraging individuals to give a thank you card to one other peer during the week. That's a great way to ensure that there's kind of an obligation across all levels of management as well as peer-to-peer, that there's usually someone you like at the office and something nice that you can say about them. We also, as a retention recognition work group, like the idea of doing a food drive day, California state employees giving back to their localities. So reaching out to your local food bank that typically gets a lot of donations during the holiday season, but may have new needs in the spring. That can be a competitive contest as well if you want, but not necessarily. And then in state service, I found that potlucks is the best thing to bring people together. And breaking bread is a great way for teams to really just appreciate each other, as well as highlight, what people like to make. This is also a great day to share either internally in your intranet, the best pictures of the week, or externally to celebrate to the public just how much you appreciate your employees. We also encourage memorializing the event. So here at CalHR, we did a photo booth of years of service and asked employees if they minded if we posted those pictures within the department. And so we created a poster size amalgamation of pictures from that event, maybe 30 of them, with our logo and the Public Service Recognition Week logo. And then we posted that throughout the divisions. And that allowed for employees that are engaged to see that their peers participated, and for employees that avoided the events to see that they too could be appreciated, if not by choice, but at least by acknowledging that management attempted to engage everyone. Next slide. Just to reiterate, including your regional offices is critical. Often in California, we have 200,000 employees, the majority of which are in Sacramento, and so headquarters tends to be the place where activities happen. but making sure that your regional offices, your field offices have the resources they need is really important. And bringing maybe their photographs or their stories to headquarters and sharing that across the department helps keep those regional areas connected to headquarters and vice versa. Next slide. In California, our governor is going to be releasing a commemorative message on May 6th. And so we'll be happy to have departments push that through the department-wide email, showing that our governor is committed to employee recognition, which is something that we can echo with an executive level message later in the week. So that's something to request in advance of Public Service Recognition Week. And depending on if your department is more publicly facing or privately facing, that can be posted either to intranet or maybe as a press release, depending on your department's comfort level. We're also posting videos from executives and people who receive recognition during that week to the California Human Resources Public Service Recognition Week website. And that will talk about, again, the value of employee recognition and what it means to individuals at the top, as well as those receiving the recognition. We do use the hashtag PSRWCA so that we can track the public-facing Public Service Recognition Week social media that's developed. And then we also request departments to let me know if they did participate and how, if they didn't do anything that was publicly facing. Next screen. So this year, GovOps, which is the Government Operations Agency of California, and CalHR has committed to doing regional appreciation events. So we'll be in Fresno, LA, San Diego, Sacramento, and Oakland. And each of those will happen at 11:30 in the morning. And an executive, either a department director or secretary, will be hosting an opportunity for employees in those regions to get together and celebrate the heroes amongst them and the work that they do on a daily basis. We will be Facebook Living the May 10th event. Again, that's at 11:30. So go to the CalHR website and you'll be able to see the Facebook Live from that page. Next page, please. This slide, again, covers the CalHR Public Service Recognition Week website. We do have resources available already, and we'll be continuing to add to those resources throughout the next 2 weeks. Next page. The federal level has a great celebration toolkit, as well as downloadable logos that you can use to brand your week's event without having to develop your own logo. Next page. Again, using the hashtag PSRWCA allows us to track all the social media posts, and please share with me anything that your department does and what level of sharing I can do with that information, whether it's to audiences like this at a national level, or if it's to internal reports that we give to Government Operations Agency. Thanks so much.
Thank you. So at this point, we do have some questions that have come in that we can go through. So first question is, how do you view or incorporate employee wellness as a key component to employee engagement?
Great question, Julie. Luckily, I sit across the hall from the Healthier You contact, and so I asked her for an answer. And so the answer is that the state of California is committed to engaging employees through a variety of wellness offerings. We have a digital platform called Healthier You Connections, which is available to all active state employees and can be found at calhrwellness.com. There's a holistic approach to address employees as a whole, including nutrition, physical fitness, behavioral health, and financial well-being. The goal is to decrease the incidence of preventable chronic disease while improving the health and well-being of our employees statewide. I've also shared a flyer about that program with Julie, and she can forward that out to attendees within California.
Julie, this is Bob. I want to add something to that, and I'm gonna mention another organization, even though it's not CPS, but Gallup organization has done a lot of work on wellness, including in a an organizational setting. And one of the things that Gallup has found is that wellness or employee engagement, a high level of engagement, is an important contributor to overall employee wellness. So as Jonathan said, there are various dimensions of wellness. There's financial wellness, spiritual wellness, physical wellness, and so on. But Gallup's research has shown that employee engagement is an important contributor to overall personal wellness. So, there are only, as an organization, there are only certain things we can influence in terms of our employees' wellness, but understanding that their connection, their commitment to work is an important contributor to wellness, I think is also important to remember.
Oh, that's a really good point. Thank you. Okay, so let's look at the next question, and that is, in terms of service awards, are gift cards perceived as flexible and useful, or are they more considered to be thoughtless and without meaning?
So in California, the Merit Award Program has an award called the Superior Accomplishment and Sustained Superior Accomplishment Award. And that's the only opportunity for a civil servant to receive a cash award for going above and beyond within the scope of their job duties. A gift card or any type of other cash equivalent is forbidden within our Constitution. So I wanted to ensure we answer this question because whatever employee recognition program you develop or have, always run it by your legal team to ensure that it's within the scope of your government's laws.
Great video. Okay, so the next question that came in is, how do I start an employee recognition program that includes peer-to-peer recognition?
Awesome. So CalHR hosts the Employee Recognition Toolkit, and you'll see a little bit down from that website an area called the Retention and Recognition Workgroup Resources. That small section has 3 really significant contributions to creating employee recognition programs at low to no cost. The intent of the work group was to have something that could be built upon as a skeleton or rolled out as a fully formed employee recognition program. The resources include a program handbook, which includes how to set up an employee recognition committee. That would be the driving force in promulgating your employee recognition program across your department. It includes a training PowerPoint, which we found to be targeted to supervisors and managers, and within the structure of California state government, it would count towards a continuing education credit for managers and supervisors, if that's something that your department's looking to develop internally. They can build off of this PowerPoint. And then we also have a PDF that's meant to be a desktop strategy for supervisors to engage employees at all levels. And so one of the ways we've utilized this here at CalHR is that we've actually printed up the PDF, which has a variety of audiences from employee to employee, supervisor to employee, supervisor to team, and then recognizing employees to upper management. It has those audiences and then daily, weekly, monthly, and other occasion strategies of recognition. And so we printed that up and gave it to every employee. And so that allows for each employee to have ideas of what to do on a regular basis of how to show their appreciation for the work their peers do. And so those 3 resources are a great start. And then, of course, Felicia and I are resources for state departments to take it to the next level. And there's also on the Employee Recognition Toolkit page a few other peers in the field, including DMV and Franchise Tax Board, that you can lean on to see what mature recognition programs look like and pick up some more strategies.
Okay, terrific. Next question for y'all is, how do you recognize the employees who aren't high performers?
I have a couple of thoughts about that. And, one of the points that I think it's important to understand when it comes to employee recognition is that people want to understand why they're being recognized. I was speaking to an HR director for a state agency, not in the state of California, but another state, and she said that the folks in her agency are tired of getting these sort of generic thank yous from the director. Thanks everybody for doing such a great job. People want to know when they're being recognized, what you're thanking me for, what you're recognizing me for, what specifically did I do, and what difference did it make? And to get to the real question, I would like to think, I hope, that regardless of whether or not somebody is a consistently top performer, we are looking for opportunities to acknowledge their contributions in a very specific way. So trying to identify things that an employee is doing well. You know, Jonathan talked a little bit about recognition that's low cost. I showed you a slide from another organization, how to recognize employees without spending a dime. You know, it's not always these formal recognition programs. It's finding opportunities to thank people for their specific contributions, to recognize what they have done. And you know, one of the examples on that slide that I showed you was asking somebody for their opinion. When you ask somebody for their opinion, you are acknowledging that they have some value to contribute, and you are interested in learning what their opinion and advice in, and that is a way to provide recognition. So formal, organization-wide, including peer-to-peer recognition programs are important, but we also need to do that on a one-to-one basis, and also understand how people like to be recognized. There are folks who would love to be publicly recognized in a group setting, in a meeting, for their contributions, but there are other people who would be mortified to be publicly acknowledged or recognized. So we have to understand what makes people tick. And again, I like to think that everyone in our organization who's making a contribution, we can find ways to thank them for their contributions.
That's great. That's fabulous. Thank you. So next question then is, how do you engage supervisors that are not supporting the recognition program for their staff?
Say that one again, Julie, please. How do we recognize supervisors?
Right. How do you engage supervisors that don't support the recognition program for their staff? So there may be apparently like a whole department that's going unrecognized because the supervisor isn't really getting involved in the recognition program.
Got it. You know, I think that, and I imagine Jonathan has some views on this as well, but I think that goes to a larger point, which is, how do we convince supervisors that employee engagement is important, knowing that recognition is a key driver of engagement? And it's really about the business case. Supervisors need to understand that engagement isn't about making their employees happy all the time. It isn't another touchy-feely thing. It's really about improving organizational performance. And when the level of engagement improves, so does the level of performance. So if a supervisor wants to be in charge of a high-performing unit or organization, we need to convince that supervisor that this stuff, engagement and recognition, are important, and it's something that they need to focus on, not something that they do when all of their other work is done, but it's an integral part of a supervisor's responsibility to understand and focus on engagement, and understand and focus on employee recognition as a way to improve engagement and improve performance. And again, not just, you know, fancy formal recognition programs, which certainly have a place, but understanding on a one-to-one basis what makes employees tick, and how I, as a supervisor, can interact with that person to make them feel good about their contributions and their work, make them understand the connection between their work and the outcomes that we produce, and recognize those contributions. So we need to convince supervisors that this stuff is important and is going to make a difference.
And to piggyback off of Bob, some of the strategies that the work group developed to conquer that specific question is the PDF that's printable from the Employee Recognition Toolkit that is specifically meant to be a desktop reminder of how to do recognition for supervisors and managers, creating that PowerPoint that can be used as continuing education credit to communicate to supervisors and managers that this is something that the department sees as valuable. The videos that we released last year with Public Service Recognition Week were intentionally from agency secretary level and director level, so that maybe that's a tool that teams could utilize to communicate to supervisors and managers that this is something that the state takes very seriously. And then it also falls to the employee engagement survey that Felicia talked about. You know, if a supervisor or manager is not convinced that based on a department recognition program, or not convinced based on a training they've received, or not convinced based on the value that executives from the highest ranks of government communicates, then maybe it's that engagement survey result that says, you know what, this department really needs to focus on recognition. So I think those are the tools that you utilize to communicate in a healthy way to supervisors and managers that this is important, and then giving them the resources to perform that function of their job when they have so many other responsibilities to do as well.
Yeah, that's a great point, Jonathan. And when we do a survey, we always recommend that the results are driven down to the lowest possible work unit level. Now, we'll only report if there are at least 10 responses, but that still leaves a lot of opportunity to drill down to individual work units and really understand, as Jonathan suggests, what the different levels of engagement are and what the different drivers are, and provide the leaders in the organization with data on their own organizations, and then hold them accountable for acting on the results.
And this is Felicia here in California. Our survey, as I mentioned earlier, includes demographic questions such as, what is your job description? Are you a supervisor? Are you a rank and file employee? And it allows the organization to look specifically at the level of engagement for supervisors and managers, and the resources that we're providing will allow the organization to consider, okay, how do we make ourselves more engaged?
One of the things I would like to, sorry, one more point, Julie, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
The Department of Motor Vehicles in California has a really robust recognition program. And one of the things that their director is committed to is presenting the Employee of the Month award. And that award ceremony includes an individual from the headquarters as well as an individual from the field office. That is both, there's a manager who's offered an award, and an employee, a rank and file, offered an award from both headquarters and field office. And when they do that award ceremony, the director, like I said, hosts it, but then the supervisors and managers and executives that are looking to further their career, they're there and they're present and they're celebrating their employees. That's one of the components to this that's maybe a soft component to supervisors and managers, where having that visibility both in celebrating your employees and with your executive peers is a career benefit for you. So that's one additional piece I just wanted to make sure we highlighted.
That's great, thank you. So here's an interesting question. Someone asks, how do you motivate long-term employees that have grown complacent and grouchy?
Grouchy, huh? I don't know how to deal with. I don't know how to deal with grouchy. Well, I'm often asked that question, particularly when we show data where we break the results down in terms of engagement levels into highly engaged, somewhat engaged, and disengaged. And again, I want to go back to a point that I thought I made, or I think I made earlier, which is I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all solution to improving engagement. I think that that's true from organization to organization, but even within the organization, I would hope that having a conversation with an employee, sometimes it really means having a candid conversation with an employee, between the supervisor and the employee. How can we put you in a position to succeed? How can we create an environment or a situation where you can feel good about the work that you do? And maybe that means you have to be somewhere else. Maybe this isn't the right place for you. But, those are tough conversations to have. But I was once told that there are no poor performers, there are just poor job fits. Now, I don't know if I subscribe to that 100%, but I think there's a lot of truth in it. rather than just letting someone, continue to perform at a suboptimal level. I recognize in the public sector it's not always easy to deal with poor performers, but maybe if we have those conversations, and they're candid conversations, how can we put you, this isn't working out. How can we put you in a position to succeed, even if we have to do that in a different environment? In most of our public sector organizations, states, jurisdictions, there are lots of opportunities for people who can maybe try some different things and move from one organization to another without leaving the organization. So there's no there's no silver bullet for how to deal with someone who is a poor performer, not to mention grouchy, but I think it starts with having candid conversations. And I hope that wasn't too grouchy, my response.
Not at all. So next question is how to include recognition if you are not a direct supervisor.
Jonathan, I think you talked about peer-to-peer, didn't you, a little bit?
I did. Something that when we established the retention and recognition work group, we acknowledged that the employee-to-employee connection was really important. And so there's the peer-to-peer piece, which is having opportunities to give a thanks to a coworker for the work they're doing. Again, to rely on DMV, they have a fillable, printable PDF on their intranet that has like a kudos award or a star award or a core value award, where you can highlight the individual's contribution to the work that you're doing together. The other component was the supervisor from a different team acknowledging an employee of a different supervisor. And so we really liked the idea that, a simple thank you email that acknowledges the work that the employee did for their non-supervisor, that includes the supervisor of their team, offers an acknowledgement to the individual, but also within the scope of their supervisor. And then we also liked the idea of having supervisors or managers do an email that acknowledges the employee's contributions within their own team, or maybe, again, someone else's team, and then CCing the next level of management up so that that individual isn't necessarily recognized in a broad public forum, but there's an email that they can reference that shows that their division chief knows that they're doing good work, not just within their own team, but in others, the team of others.
Okay, terrific. Thank you. So here's a question that comes in, and it sounds like it carries on from the question about the gift cards. Somebody writes that during the holidays, some supervisors give their team, their staff, small gifts and treat staff to a luncheon, and they're wondering, is that prohibited? Sometimes that's part of their way of saying, well done, but it's intended to last for the full year. So I think the question is, are gifts and lunches allowable where maybe cash gifts aren't?
For me, the concern would be equity across the department in what the executive or the department, the division chief or the supervisor manager is doing as far as gifts go. First of all, that's a personal burden that not every supervisor or manager can afford. And secondly, it could create tension between teams if Team A is getting a luncheon and gifts from their supervisor manager, and then Team B is getting maybe just a note of thanks. And so that's a conversation that I would hope executives have together that would unify or make it consistent what the expectation is, and take into account the financial burden, since that would be a personal cost by the supervisor or manager, and being mindful of consistency across department lines.
Yeah, Jonathan, I have a little different perspective on that one. And sometimes I like to say that treating people fairly doesn't mean treating them equally. And I guess I would hate to, sort of prevent someone from doing something that would be perceived as a nice gesture, simply because not everyone was doing it. I certainly get your point about, creating some supervisors not being financially able to do that. But I wouldn't want to prevent someone from, as I said, doing something that's a nice gesture simply because not everyone else was doing it. But it does raise some interesting cultural and ethical questions. I certainly agree with that.
Okay, well, terrific. And we are at time now. So I want to thank you, Bob, Felicia, and Jonathan, for a great presentation. And thank you to everyone who joined us today. Again, we will send an email with a link to the recording and the slide deck within 24 hours of today's webinar. So I want to thank you all and hope you have a great day.